So we're asking the question what Jesus might say to folks who struggle toward mental health. And to get at that, I wanted to read you a number of incidents, a number of cases that Jesus dealt with. This first one, relatively long, but I want you to get all the details. It's fascinating. And picture, and I'll unpack it a little bit. Take a look. They came to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man came out of the tomb with an unclean spirit and met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain. For he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran, bowed down before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For Jesus had said to the man, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now there on the hillside a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, and let us enter them." So Jesus gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. Now the follow-up is really interesting. The swine herders ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came to see what it was that had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demoniac sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demoniac and to the swine reported it. Then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by demons begged Jesus that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your friends, tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. That's one long story. I'm going to click through 4 or 5 others as we try and explore this. Another short piece of scripture, Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but find no rest. You may notice Jesus quoted that psalm, started to on the cross, but probably ran out of breath. He got the first line out, my God, why have you forsaken me? So we read Psalm 22, which sounds like someone in the depths of clinical depression. And we read an account like this on the screen. Jesus healing a man with some form of emotional or psychiatric disorder. And it's clear that people of faith have confronted and worked toward mental health for centuries. Rick Warren, many of you know the name, one of the most significant pastors positively impacting our culture and the church in the last generation. He's written the best-selling book, The Purpose-Driven Life. He's written The Meaning of Christmas, which we used and had over 100 copies circulating around here in study groups. Rick and Kay Warren lost a son, Matthew, in the spring of 2013, died of an apparent suicide. Matthew, 27 years old, had long suffered from bipolar disorder, and as part of that, suffered from intense periods of deep depression, including suicidal impulses. The Warrens had worked quietly supporting Matthew for years, but they lost him. Robin Williams is another case, a comic genius who achieved so much good but lost the struggle with clinical depression. Rick and Kay Warren, after 4 months of grieving and away from active ministry and leadership in their church, they came back. And they came back with a new purpose and a message. They've led workshops how to get through what you're going through. And they relate their journey to rely on hope in God through their subsequent grief. One of the things Rick Warren said was, God knows what it's like to lose a son. And he went on to say, it's amazing to me that any other organ in your body can break down, and there's no shame and stigma to it. But if your brain breaks down, you're supposed to keep it a secret. If your brain doesn't work right, why should you be ashamed of that? Good question, the right question. Closer to home, in her post-athletic career, our Canadian Olympian Clara Hughes has given herself now toward helping people work for mental health. She tells her story, and I'm quoting directly from a CBC interview she did when she was launching the Ride Across Canada for Let's Talk program about mental health. Quote, I was living and training in Hamilton, and as the months rolled by after my season ended, I just started feeling really, really bad. And I thought, it's probably just post-Olympic letdown that everybody talks about. But I just felt like I was spiraling downwards into this dark place, and just was isolating myself a lot from people because I just didn't know how to deal with the emotions that I had. I was still pushing myself really hard in training, and it got worse and worse and worse. And by the time December and January rolled around, I was literally crying every day and not knowing why, sleeping a tremendous amount, always feeling exhausted, and it was really affecting my training, my life. I went to a national team camp, and that's when one of the doctors met with me for a physical. She asked me how things were going, and I just started crying. She said, what's wrong, Clara? You know you can talk to me about this. And I just started telling her how I had been feeling for months at that time. And she said, it sounds like you might be dealing with depression, and a lot of people deal with this. And there are many ways you can look for help. We're going to get you better, and it's going to be okay. That last point was really important for me because that was the point where I realized maybe I didn't have to try and fix it by myself. She went on. I'll just quote a little more from that CBC interview. What surprises me is so many people have come up to me and said, I've struggled with depression, or I've struggled with this. There's so many people like me. I'm just one of many, hundreds of thousands. So I really have the hope that my being involved in this Let's Talk mental health initiative, I really have the hope that this is going to open up a dialogue that's going to change the face of mental health in Canada. I feel like I have a chance to make an impact that is far greater than sport ever will. 6 Olympic medals, and her goal now is to do more good. I agree with her that her opening up and talking. I wonder what Jesus might say to Clara Hughes. Because unlike the trend in our society, even in churches, even in faith communities where we are silent or suppress, I'm pretty sure Jesus knows about the struggle. And I think Jesus would get involved. Listen, I'm going to click through. I read you that long Mark passage of the disturbed man in the cemetery. I'm going to click through 5 more. And Ken, I may fast forward these, so be ready when I say next slide. They went to Capernaum, and he entered the synagogue and taught. Just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth?" Dropping down, Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. Chapter 1 of Mark. And he cured many, so that all who had diseases pressed upon him to touch him. Whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and shouted, "You are the Son of God." Chapter 3 of Mark. A woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about Jesus. She came and bowed down at his feet. Jesus said to her, "You may go, the demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed and the demon gone. Chapter 7 of Mark. And they brought a boy to him. When the spirit saw Jesus, immediately it convulsed the boy. He fell on the ground, rolled about, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And the father said, "From childhood. It has often cast him into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you are able to do anything, have pity on us and help us." Jesus said to him, "If you are able, all things can be done for the one who believes." And immediately the father of the child cried out, "I believe, help my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You spirit that keeps this boy from speaking and hearing, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." After crying out, convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he was able to stand. I read these and I feel emotional. I can feel myself tearing up, picturing Jesus. Mercy on a little child. One more. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now, they're in Capernaum. I cut that part. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. Jesus came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her. She began to serve them. That evening at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons. And the whole city was gathered around the door, and Jesus cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to his deserted place, and there he prayed. This stuff just gets to me. Jesus just draining himself in compassion, healing people. And to keep his resources strong, he gets out in the dark and goes and prays. I could go on with these stories, but it's clear Jesus knew about and addressed every form of illness you can diagnose, including mental illness. Now, the elephant in the room is, what did they have? Were some of them epileptic? Were they schizophrenic? Were they really demon-possessed? That is the elephant there, and I'll come back to it. But we can't make an exact diagnosis from this distance. Whatever they had, Jesus healed them. He did not shy away or shun or blame. He went after the illness with this determined compassion. And that, my friends, is our role model. Right there. I probably could stop now and just say, make Jesus your role model. But I'll go on. As a culture, we're not comfortable talking about mental illness. Even in 2016, there's a stigma about admitting you struggle with depression or with anxiety and panic attacks or any other mental health problem. We've come a long way in not verbally stigmatizing, but I still know too many people who are embarrassed or ashamed to admit they struggled with mental health. There are too many to believe for a moment that we've completely overcome our biases. All too often, we think of mental health problems as a character flaw or a weakness. We don't say that about diabetes, which is a pancreatic insulin deal. Why do we pick one organ that malfunctions? And we need to begin to view mental health problems from the perspective of faith, of Jesus' faith. Let me reel off some stats at you. A study from the National Institute of Mental Health suggests 1 in 4 adults suffers from a diagnosable form of mental illness in any given year. Stress-induced, genetically DNA-induced, all sources, but another report says 1 in 20 adults suffers severely enough that it regularly disrupts their work and their relationships. And what all that means is that most of us, even if we haven't personally suffered ourselves, we know and we love someone who has. The point about being a follower of Jesus is that he can help us look at, think about, respond to, talk about, and in general, make sense of my life, your life, all of our life, including the hard and challenging parts as well as the beautiful and wonderful parts. All of that from within the framework of the Christian story of Jesus and his life. If we look at Jesus' ministry and the frequency of his being confronted with disturbed individuals, then maybe too we can face the reality of mental health struggles. And in so doing, we begin to move toward normalizing conversations about mental health. It's natural, it's normal, it's okay, it's acceptable. Depression, bipolar disorder, substance abuse, post-traumatic stress disorder, bulimia, other eating disorders, panic attacks, these and other struggles are not things to be ashamed of, but rather elements of our human condition. The more we can talk about these things in the everyday venues of our congregational life and faith community, the less peculiar or aberrant or dangerous they will seem. And I'll just interject, I'm going off script, but I am delighted at what the Friday night community is doing. Once a month for the last 5 or 6 months, they have had a mental health professional in and used the Pritchard room, and they'll get 45, 75 people in there talking about these issues. Marvelous. Several of the cases Jesus was confronted by could have been epilepsy or schizophrenia or other known conditions. But several were beyond what the medical community can deal with. And that's the elephant in the room, so to speak. Is there such a thing as demonic possession? I'm just going to spend a small portion on that, and then we'll move on. Is there such a thing as otherworldly forces of evil? Out of this world forces of evil that invade a human. Listen to Dr. Richard Gallagher. I got this out of a Washington Post article. He's a board-certified psychiatrist, professor of psychiatry, graduate of Yale. Listen to what he wrote. For the past 2.5 decades and over several hundred consultations, I've helped clergy from multiple denominations, exorcists, to filter episodes of mental illness, which represent the overwhelming majority of cases, to filter them from literally the devil's work. He goes on. Is it possible to be a sophisticated psychiatrist and believe that evil spirits are, however seldom, assailing humans? Most of my scientific colleagues and friends say no. But careful observation of the evidence presented to me in my career has led me to believe that certain extremely uncommon cases can be explained in no other way. I've read Dr. Scott Peck, psychiatrist of a generation ago, who said much the same thing. It's extremely rare, but there are demonic forces, out of this world forces, that are not what we would call normal human mental health issues. And I do believe that. I do believe in satanic forces on a very rare but real basis. So that's the extreme in one direction, external supernatural forces. On the other hand, on the other end of the scale, there is a low-level pervading dis-ease in our affluent culture that elevates leisure and luxury as the goal of life. And there's an angst. Because when you've got the Lexus and the Muskoka cottage, what do? Your heart says there must be more. The great Carl Jung identified this. Quote, about a third of my cases are suffering from no clinically definable neurosis, but from the senselessness and emptiness of their lives. This can be defined as the general neurosis of our times. You're all neurotic. That was fun. Me too. It's a general neurosis of living in affluent, luxurious North America, Burlington, safe, stable, secure. There's an angst, if that's all there is. Sebastian Junger is a journalist and researcher who has discovered, and he's working on this same theme, he's discovered that the military, both Canadian and American, now have the highest PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, in history. He sees that, and then he looks in contrast at how crime dropped in post-9/11 New York, and mental health improved during the London Blitz. Because in those two crisis periods, people supported each other and they were united in common cause. The London Blitz, post 9/11. And Junger argues in his book Tribe on homecoming and belonging. He's talking about soldiers who come home and just feel isolated, disconnected. He says, humans don't mind hardship as much as they mind feeling useless. And modern society has perfected the art of making people not feel necessary. I think he's right. So, all of that is background. I've gone from one extreme, demonic possession, to the general neurosis of people living with too much and no purpose. All of that and everything in between, all of that is background. What would Jesus say to Clara Hughes and Robin Williams and Margaret Trudeau and to us? I think firstly he would say, I understand. I understand your sadness, your stress, your confusion, your anxiety. Jesus was able to look deep into the lives of the people he touched. He saw their pain because Jesus had the insight of the Holy Spirit, God's Spirit within him, living there. And he was able to see clearly the exact nature of their need, whether it was an adult or a child. Psalm 139 describes God's intimate discernment. I love this. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar away. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. Jesus has that knowledge of all of us. He understands the emotional pain, the cognitive confusions, the mental struggles that each one of us has. So we can be honest, we can be trusting, and we can be vulnerable with him. Jesus understands. What else might he say? I think Jesus also would say, I'm with you. I do not abandon you in life's messy moments. In fact, I seek you out at that time. I come to you in those hours. Let me do a quick Bible study. I'm going way back to that first Mark passage. That long story of Jesus being confronted by a disturbed man and in a cemetery and sending unclean spirits into a nearby herd of swine. I want to do this quick Bible study because the details are really significant. This happened, I don't know how your geography is, but here's Jerusalem, the Jordan River, and the Sea of Galilee. And here is Israel and Judea. And Jesus and the Jews live here. He crossed the Sea of Galilee and he's over in foreign territory, in the Gerasenes, it's called. And he goes into a cemetery where this man is. Now, for Jews, cemeteries are unclean. You don't go there only on the day when you bury someone. Jewish ritual rules said he should not be there. Foreigners, non-Jews cemetery. And there were pigs on the hillside. Most of us know about the Jewish prohibition against pork. All of this says Jesus is in the wrong place. His GPS is broken down. I mean, that voice made him turn what is he doing here? Except he knows exactly what he's doing here. He's going into the place and he's meeting the man who is unacceptable to his tribe, who is avoided and ignored and outcast by his tribe. And Jesus goes to him. And in an exchange, a conversation they have where Jesus actually discusses with the disturbed man, Jesus initiates a healing process that works. In this example and in all the cases I skimmed through, we see a Jesus who declares, I am with you. I do not abandon you when life is messy. In fact, that's when I come to you. So I want to say that your faith, our faith, is very much a part of our emotional and cognitive struggles. There is hope. There is a way through to healing. And the living God who came in Jesus is very much with us in our darkest days. We use every resource God provides. We use wise counselors. We use precision medications. We use honest and caring friends and family. You or a loved one can get through the dark valley of depression the breathless panic attacks, the confused reasoning when the brain blocks and distorts. I've been a minister 38 years, 4 different churches. I've served. There's been a number of wonderful families struck by issues of mental health, and they struggle to bring a loved one toward wholeness and health. And this week I remembered one particular case and earlier connected with one of the family. Listen to their recollections and their reflections. I'm reading almost verbatim what they emailed to me. I edited it slightly with their permission. Listen, living with someone who suffers from bipolar is one of the most challenging illnesses to witness. Most people give up early, and the disorder goes on undiagnosed. In our family's case, we experienced several occurrences of severe emotional terrorism from the person we loved most and knew loved us. But just when you think the person couldn't be more evil, voila, they were. One instance was when our family moved away, and I edited, but there were as many as 50 instances. One instance was when our family member moved away to take on the world by themselves without a navigator and without support. And without the proper support, they ended up in intensive care fighting for their life while their family prayed and cursed from afar. Prayer was for recovery, but also for clarity as to why I even needed to go through this. The relationship should simply end, maybe just give up. But after a full-blown psychiatric analysis and finally the diagnosis of bipolar, which was discovered to be in the family history, medication was prescribed and the trial and error process began. It wasn't until several years later and several attempts to balance chemistry when the medicine finally worked. Family support, therapy, and most certainly prayer helped get us through this wilderness. And the last of the email said this: "Let me stress that awareness and education are critical, but patience and compassion are equally as important." So let me just pray for a moment. Holy One, you walked dusty roads. You went to the worst cases and sought out broken hearts, wounded minds, severed spirits. And you showed us that you care, that God cares. And you showed us that we can be loved even in our brokenness. And you showed us and called us to love one another and to go into the messy moments and care for one another. Holy One, thank you. You are our role model. Thank you. Amen. Last quote. It's on the front cover of your bulletin. It's on screen. Never give up on someone with a mental illness. When I is replaced by we, illness becomes wellness. I can work with that. Amen.